I recently went down to the south coast to spend some time with a few friends, and it was one of the most English experiences that I've had in my adult life. I say adult life because this is what my life was like every single day when I was a child, but as we know, the forced vast demographic shifts that we've experienced, especially over the last couple of decades, have changed things in England rather dramatically. I visited the Cathedral of Chichester in West Sussex, a county town with a rich Roman and Anglo-Saxon history. I journeyed to the market town of Arundel and explored the countryside and the historic cobbled streets, while the medieval Arundel Castle overlooked me from above. I toured Petworth Park, surrounded by 700 acres of luscious English countryside. It was lovely. Although I didn't know anybody, apart from my friends, I was surrounded by familiar faces. There was a sense of community and trust. I saw people leaving their houses without bothering to lock the door. I saw unsupervised young children playing in the street. I even saw a man open his car boot and then carry his stuff up the street while leaving his car boot open in the middle of a busy town centre. Imagine doing that in London. Although I don't doubt that they were there, I didn't see any supermarkets. I saw independent shops instead. The meat came from English farms, the fish was caught in English rivers or English seas, and the vegetables were grown in English gardens. My only complaint was that they don't seem to have Yorkshire tea down there, so I had to drink Twinings instead, but I'll live. Now, I know that you can say that some of these experiences exist because of outside influence. Tea originated in southwest China, for example, but there's a difference between learning something from another people and likewise teaching something to another people, but carrying out the act yourself, and inviting millions of people to live with you and having them transform your culture and demographically replace you. We have the recipes, we don't need the chefs. There was only one thing that threw me off the whole time I was down there. It was some of the people. They were kind and helpful and intelligent, that wasn't the problem. The thing that threw me off was that they were huge liberals. How can they live in such a beautiful, safe, homogenous community, yet want to ruin that? Do they even understand what they stand to lose? I saw so many EU flags while I was down there. The bookshops I peered into were filled with progressive and feminist literature. I saw refugees welcome stickers on people's cars. I even saw somebody wearing a "Don't Blame Me, I Voted Remain" t-shirt, 2 years after the vote, I might add. It reminded me of York back up home in Yorkshire, another very historic, very English city, chock-a-block with Liberals and Remain voters. There seems to be a trend. I've often found that in very English middle-class areas, the citizens have no experience of diversity, but they want to invite it to live with them nonetheless. Other areas of Yorkshire aren't so fortunate. Let me tell you what it's like living amongst diversity. In Yorkshire, we've had major grooming gangs in Rotherham, Huddersfield, Bradford and Keighley, plus other areas which were less publicised. Hundreds of thousands of English girls have suffered at the hands of predominantly Pakistani Muslim men, including girls I went to school with. Children have been plied with drugs and alcohol, raped, tortured and even murdered, yet we're not allowed to talk about it because that's racist. The demographics of our country are changing before our eyes at a completely unnatural rate. You don't experience this yourself in your safe white areas, but we do. Many of us no longer recognise our homes. We don't recognise our neighbours and they don't recognise us either. They don't share the same values, language, culture and religion as us. You think that this spices things up for us, but it doesn't. It results in conflict. Back when I lived in Bradford, I was told to leave certain areas because I was white. I was called a white slag and told that I wasn't welcome there. But yeah, there's no culture clashes here. Everything is just fine. Crime is on the rise in these areas too. Birmingham, which is now a city where the white British are a minority, has had a surge in crime over recent years. Over the course of 1 year, there has been an increase in sexual offences recorded by police by 24%. Robbery is up 30%, vehicle theft is up 17%, knife crime is up 16%, murder is up 12%, overall theft is up 8%, burglary is up 6%, and offences involving firearms is up 2%. But the worst part of all this is our concerns for the future. We wonder how far this is going to go. We wonder whether our children will be safe or whether they'll be a hated minority in their own country. I hope you can understand why it concerns me to see these lovely traditional villages on my trip down south, but to also see what their future would hold if the progressives got their way. So why are people with no experience of diversity so keen to invite diversity into their homes? I believe that there are people in England who live in a complete bubble and have little to no understanding of the atrocities that we're facing. They find comfort and ease in liberal values. It's the easy choice after all. Why go looking elsewhere when you're already being rewarded for your thoughts and you're already receiving metaphorical pats on the back for parroting the same predictable talking points as everybody else? I've often wondered how and why this happens, and I believe that it's a result of a three-pronged method, the 3 I's, otherwise known as isolation, indoctrination and intimidation. I'll go into this in more depth in a moment, but just to clarify these terms for you, isolation is when somebody has no experience of living with diversity, and also, as we know, the majority of people are more likely to be friends with and social media mutuals with people they agree with. On Twitter, for example, studies show that the left and the right are generally isolated from each other, with retweets rarely leaving each group's bubble. And then in relation to indoctrination and intimidation, the mainstream media peddles liberal talking points, as do our celebrities, our education systems, our politicians and our advertising agencies. Nationalists are painted as the bad guys. Anybody who dares to go against the mainstream narrative is ridiculed and ostracised in order to warn others off from daring to think the same. The establishment incessantly drips white guilt and cultural Marxism into our brains until many among us are even too scared to say, "It's okay to be white." On top of this, we all saw the study which triggered the NPC meme that revealed that not everybody conducts inner dialogue. Not everybody is able to critique things and form conclusions themselves. So, is it any wonder that, especially when people live in areas completely untouched by diversity, and especially with the non-stop brainwashing and threats that they receive, that we have so many people with the same uncritical worldview? I'll give you an example. While I was on my trip down south, there were armed policemen walking through a town. I knew that this is a result of diversity. I've seen armed guards up north and in London after terror attacks and around Christmas markets. A middle-class woman who I admit I'm just assuming was a liberal looked confused and asked the guards why they were there. They're a result of your liberal values, a result of your desire to invite the third world to come and live with us. Before you jump to make excuses for these people, I'd like to remind you that there are also similar people living in 44.89% white British London who make out like they have no idea what's going on as well. They are surrounded by diversity, yet the bubble that they live in shields them from seeing the truth. And even the people that haven't experienced diversity themselves, are we to honestly believe that there are people in our country who don't know about last year's terror attacks and all the grooming gangs? Even if their only window to the outside world is the TV and newspapers, these stories have been all over the news. Why didn't they research them further and look at the statistics? Why don't they care? We've all tried proving something to a progressive leftist on social media, only for them to put their fingers in their ears and refuse to listen. Perhaps being ignorant isn't compulsory. Perhaps remaining ignorant is actually a choice. I'd like to talk for a moment about the power of propaganda. Born to a Jewish family in Austria in 1891, Edward Bernays is one of the most well-known names in the field of public relations and propaganda. Bernays helped the Woodrow Wilson administration in the United States to promote the idea that if the United States were to get involved in World War I, then this would help bring democracy to Europe. His efforts proved hugely successful. Public opinion changed during his campaign from being against entering the war to being for it. Bernays essentially sold war by appealing to images and symbols. Having seen the effectiveness of propaganda during World War I, Bernays wondered whether it might be as effective during times of peace. Taking inspiration from his uncle Sigmund Freud, Bernays focused on people's drives and desires and then harnessed them for commercial ends. Bernays had great success in manipulating the masses. Just to give one example, when the tobacco industry wanted to expand its customer base, Bernays made the decision to make smoking popular among women. He convinced women that the forest green hue of the Lucky Strike cigarette packet was a fashionable colour, and then positioned cigarettes into the hands of women in films and on the catwalk. He understood that as human beings, we want to emulate and model ourselves on people who we think are popular, successful and attractive. Bernays wrote in his 1928 book Propaganda, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organised habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed. Our minds are moulded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. Men are rarely aware of the real reasons which motivate their actions. He added, "The great enemy of any attempt to change a men's habit is inertia. Civilization is limited by inertia." Sound familiar? So if we go back to the 3 I's, isolation and indoctrination and intimidation, the so-called invisible government that Bernays mentioned doesn't want us to think. It wants us to eat our TV dinners, vote for our favourite X Factor singer, buy the latest smartphone, build up all our anger for this weekend's football match and listen to the latest chart toppers or watch this week's blockbuster at the cinema. We've been conditioned to live our lives like that. This starts from an early age with them controlling our education systems and children's television shows. One of the most powerful tools of the establishment is the ostracising, belittlement and shaming of those who stray away from the mainstream narrative. They call anything that they disagree with lies, and they repeat the same phrases and talking points over and over again until they become second nature and ingrained within people's minds. Diversity is our strength. Islam is a religion of peace. Israel is our greatest ally. The invisible government uses loaded language such as racist and white supremacist until the public believe that being upset about mass-scale child rape or not wanting to become a hated minority in your own country makes you an evil person. You can't even say that you love your race without receiving the conditioned response that this must mean that you hate everybody else. They turn good into bad. They turn love into hate. They turn truth into lies, and they turn bravery into fear. They want to create the perfect consumer and sever our connection to our heritage and past. Is it any wonder that people don't bother asking questions? Is it any wonder that when people live in these beautiful, untouched areas with no experience of diversity, and when they've been fed non-stop liberal talking points, and when they've been warned off from straying from the mainstream path, that they choose to stay in their little bubble and echo what's easy, shielded from what they might discover, and protected from any difficult path that might follow? I started this channel with a video in which I criticised white liberal men, and I still despise them and their weak, predictable answers and desire for consensus. I also believe that we shouldn't make excuses for those who choose what's easy over what's right. But let us not lose track of who the real enemy are. A single leftist may be able to influence his inner circle or his social media following, but the establishment has the power to influence us all.